Um, Very excited to welcome Josh Kaufman this afternoon. Josh is an independent business professor, an education activist, and the author of the Personal MBA, Master the Art of Business. Josh also runs an extremely popular blog, thepersonalmba.com. Highly recommend you check it out. Tons of great business tips, videos, and he also does book summaries, which are awesome. In exciting news, Josh's book is the #1 international bestseller in terms of business training books, which is really exciting. And another fun fact is that he recently welcomed daughter Leela Christine into the world, who is 7 weeks old. And he lives with his family in Fort Collins, Colorado. So without further ado, Josh Kaufman.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for inviting me here. As Jenny said, I'm Josh Kaufman. I run a website called personalmba.com and just came out with a book, The Personal MBA, Master the Art of Business. And effectively, I am a business teacher. I teach business skills and business principles to people who really need them and can use them, but don't necessarily want to take 2 years and spend a lot of money going back to school to get a degree. So I work with entrepreneurs and craftsmen and professionals and programmers and designers and people who know something that's valuable, but they just don't have a very clear picture about necessarily what a business really is, or what a business really does, or how it works, or how they can start one. Or if they're working for a company, what they can do to actually improve the business, to make it better. And so the purpose of the Personal MBA is to help people learn essential business skills, the very small set of concepts that you really need to understand in order to do well in business, no matter who you are or no matter what you're up to. But as far as business teachers go, I'm a little odd. As you can see, I am not an old man. I am 29 years old. I am not a former Fortune 50 CEO. I'm not here to tell you that the route to success is to do what I did and become just like me and you will be successful. That's not what I'm about. I'm also not a business academic. I don't have a PhD. I don't work at a business school, but I do teach business. The story of the Personal MBA is a story of exploration. It's a very personal one. I did not start out in business. I have a technical background in computer engineering and information systems design. And as I was graduating from the University of Cincinnati in the Business Information Systems program, I had a very unique opportunity. The University of Cincinnati has a wonderful thing called cooperative education, a co-op program. And as a result, I spent about a year and a half while I was still in school working for a very large company, Procter & Gamble. And I was responsible for helping one of the very first teams in Procter & Gamble dip their toes into the water in digital internet relationship marketing. I worked on a website called Homemade Simple, which is kind of these big home care brands, Mr. Clean, Swiffer, Dawn, Cascade, and Febreze, all pooled their money and said, how do we market these consumer products online? It was very new territory, and they needed technical help in order to do that. So that's how I started working at Procter & Gamble. And as I was going, I started working on things that were a little less technical and a little more marketing related. And so by the time I graduated from the University of Cincinnati, I had a full-time job as an assistant brand manager at Procter & Gamble on the Mr. Clean brand, which was very ironic because I had just shaved my head at the time. And people thought I was really, really into my job. It was great. So what I found was I was in a job, all of my peers had MBAs. They had recently graduated from top 15 business schools. That's the clearest and most direct path to becoming an assistant brand manager. And I didn't have that. So I was in the middle of this massive corporation, one of the largest business structures in the world, learning a ton about how big companies work. And I was also taking what I had learned and comparing that with what I had learned starting businesses on my own. I ran a web design company for a number of years and could see a future in which I would want to do my own thing, have my own company, be my own boss. And so I became mildly obsessed with learning how the business side of things worked. I really wanted to understand how large companies function, how small companies function, what makes them similar, what makes them different, and what are the core things that everybody needs to know in order to do well. And so I started where most people start, which is I considered going back to school. I looked into the GMAT, I got the nice glossy brochures from lots of business schools, and I started investigating, okay, if I want to learn business, maybe the best thing for me is to go back to school and learn as much as I possibly can that way. But the more I researched, the more I realized that this wasn't really a good option for me, because business schools have effectively, over the past several decades, become less about education and more about getting a very expensive social signal. So business schools are expensive. They take a lot of time. They take a lot of money. You are leaving your job and you're going in and going to school for a number of years. And the benefit of that is, yes, there are some companies who, if you have the MBA stamp on your diploma, will give you an interview. That is a benefit. But that's a benefit that wears out very quickly. And the more I researched and the more I tried to figure out if business school was a good thing for me, I kept hearing things like, you don't go to business school for the education. You go to business school for the stamp on your diploma that gets you an interview. And so by effectively buying yourself a $150,000 interview, there's a massive cost to that. There's a cost, not just the direct cost of actually paying money, but most people finance business school with debt. And that debt is an enormous drag on your freedom and your flexibility to explore and do things that you care about. There was a great book that was published a couple years ago called Ahead of the Curve, 2 years at Harvard Business School by Philip Delves Broughton. And he talks about what he calls the MBA hamster wheel, where you go to school and you borrow a lot of money, and then you have to work this very intense job to pay back the money that you borrowed in the first place. And it's kind of like the Red Queen syndrome, right? You're running and running and running just to stay where you already are. And so for me, in my situation, I just wanted to learn this stuff. I didn't necessarily need the stamp. I didn't necessarily want the stamp. I wanted to learn all of this by myself. And so as I was collecting all of this information and trying to figure out what to do, I talked to one of my associate directors at P&G, a man by the name of Andy Walter, who is now one of P&G's top IT managers and is responsible for some of P&G's largest projects. And he said, Josh, here's how it is. If you would spend the same time and the same energy that you would get going back to school and getting a degree, if you would take that time and energy and just funnel it into your job and do the best work you can and learn as much as you can on your own, you will do just as well, if not better, than going to business school. And that made a lot of sense to me. So that's what I chose to do. I chose to, instead of going to school, bootstrap my own business education as far as I possibly could. And the best place to do that is the library and the bookstore. And you remember that scene in Good Will Hunting where you spent $150,000 on an education that you could have got for $1.50 at the public library? I literally did the $1.50 part. I walked myself down to the Cincinnati Public Library and pretty much every Barnes & Noble in the greater Cincinnati area. And I walked myself to the business section and I picked up a book and I started reading and reading and reading and reading. And by the time I started in my first full-time job at P&G, I had read hundreds of business books in management, in marketing, statistics, accounting, corporate strategy, everything that I could get my hands on, I read. And I learned a lot, and it was rewarding. And if you think about it, authors spend an enormous amount of time and energy taking this vast array of knowledge and experience that they've gained over the years, and they put a lot of work into condensing it down to the smallest possible form, and they put it in a book. And you can walk into a library or into a bookstore and either read it for free or read it for less than $20. There's an amazing amount of information out there in the world about how businesses worked, and I just decided to tap into that directly. Now, unfortunately, in the business category, there's also a lot of bullshit. I'm sure we've all read business books that, you get to the end, it's like, I wasted an hour to read that. There are according to Barker, which is the agency that assigns ISBN numbers, the unique identifier for books, something like 11,000 business books published every year. That's a lot of information. And it's very confusing when you see all of these books turn over every year. It's hard to separate what are the good investments of time and what are the absolute, complete, and utter wastes of time. And so as I was going through this process of educating myself, I was learning a lot, not just about business, but about which resources were really valuable and which weren't. And so I decided to start my website, personalmba.com, to help other people essentially do the same thing, to direct them to the resources that were valuable and to steer them away from the resources that really weren't as valuable. Now, when you read thousands of business books, it's amazing because the same patterns, the same concepts, the same theories keep coming up over and over and over again. And this is actually a consequence of something we've all heard of, the 80-20 or the Pareto Principle, right? Only 20% of the concepts that you will read in a business book or the ideas are actually useful. Only a very small percentage of the things that you can know about business carry most of the weight. And so as I was reading all of these books, I started seeing these patterns and these themes. And so the next evolution of the Personal MBA became less about books, which books should you read if you want to educate yourself about business, and more about what are the ideas, what are the concepts that govern how every business works, from the smallest microventure to the largest corporations in the world. What are the patterns? What are the themes? And the idea is if you learn those essential concepts, and call these ideas mental models, if you learn these essential mental models first, you're as well prepared as you can possibly be for real-world business situations because you understand how the whole thing works. You understand the structure. You understand the questions to ask. And at least if you're in a situation where you have no idea what's going on, at least it gives you a place to start, even if you have no experience. And so the central idea of the Personal MBA is not to answer any of the millions and millions of things that you absolutely need to know to do exactly what you need to do. That's impossible. There are millions of answers, and they're all different. It all depends on who you are, what you're doing, who you're working with. But the questions are the same. And so the goal of the Personal MBA is to help you learn enough about how businesses actually work to help you ask good questions. And by asking the right questions, you can gather more information, make informed decisions, and ultimately do better than you otherwise would. And so the whole idea is once you understand more about business, I think if you come from a creative or a technical background, it's very easy to find the entire subject of business intimidating. It's complex, it's weird, it's strange. Things don't work exactly the way that you may have learned in your particular discipline. But once you really understand these mental models, this very small core set of things that provide most of the value and most of the difference, the whole world of business kind of opens up. I mean, just look around us right now. Everything that we see, from the projector to the screen to the carpet to the chairs to my computer and my iPod Touch, I mean, all of these things were created by a business. And once you really understand how that works, you start seeing the same things everywhere. And having a systematic way to learn those things first is very useful. I got an email this morning from a reader who had just read the book and said, I felt like this approach defragged the business part of my brain. We are taking in all of these patterns and all of these ideas ad hoc all the time, and taking just a little while to examine them and to consolidate them and to remove the overlaps and see how they all interact. That's an enormously useful, enormously valuable use of time. And when you take a moment to do that, the whole world of business becomes much easier to understand. It becomes much less intimidating. And as a result, you feel much more free to take risks at your job, to start something new, or to do something that hasn't been done before. So what we'll do right now is talk a little bit about the high level of how businesses actually work, how they're structured, and then we'll talk about two related subjects that are related to business in a very important way, which is people and systems. So if you take a step back and you think about what is a business really? When we're doing business, what are we doing? It's a very simple question, and unfortunately, it's one that's not asked nearly often enough. And there's a simple answer to that simple question. The first is every single business creates something of value for other people. If you're not creating something of value, you have nothing to trade, and therefore you don't have a business. Once you create something of value, you have to get people's attention and make them interested in that value in order for any transactions to take place, right? So that's marketing. You're just getting people's attention and doing that in a way that makes them interested in learning more about who you are and what you have to offer. Now, once you have their attention, you have to convince them that what you have is valuable enough in order to pull out their wallet or their checkbook or their credit card and say, yes, I'll take one and pay you money. That's sales. That's all you're doing. You're trying to encourage people to trust your ability to deliver value and pay you money in return. Now, once somebody pays you, you actually have to give them what you promised, right? Otherwise, you're a scam. And that's value delivery. You're providing the value that you promised in a way that makes the customer happy and satisfied that they've done business with you. And throughout this entire process, you're spending money and you're collecting money. And finance is simply figuring out how much money am I spending, how much money am I making, am I making more than I'm spending, and is it enough to make it worth it to keep going? That's really it. 5 parts of every business: value creation, marketing, sales, value delivery, finance. And that very simple structure, it's not complicated. It's mostly common sense. But if you're starting a new business and you're interested in creating a business plan, those are the 5 places to start. Put them as headers. Fill in the blanks. Because that's what a business is and that's what a business does. And if you understand that that's how every single business works, you can use that structure to actually examine a business and see how to make it better, to see what you're doing well or not doing yet, and to start there. Because the things that will improve a business most are related in some way, shape, or form to those 5 core things. And so I think it's very easy when you're just getting started in learning about business to over-focus on the money part. And money is important. And if you go to business school, you'll spend a lot of time doing very complex calculations and spreadsheets and quantitative analysis and all of these things that are focused on the dollars and cents part. And that's all well and good. But it's very important to understand that unless you're doing the value creation, the marketing, the sales, and the value delivery, you have no finances to analyze. And so start with those first. Now, there's another problem when you get started in business, and this is a problem that is very pervasive. It affects small businesses just as well as larger ones, which is, let's say you have an idea to create something. How do you know whether or not people actually value it enough to pay for? It's not created yet. It's very uncertain. And this is an idea called the iron law of the market, and it was phrased best by Mark Andreessen, who was the founder of Netscape. And he said, businesses that don't exist, or markets that don't exist, don't care how smart you are. And a really good example of that is, you remember a couple years ago when the Segway personal transporter came out, the 2-wheeled scooter thing? Do you remember the hype just before that came out? You know, this was going to be an invention that changed society, and it was very secretive. And it was, to the investors and the people who were running the business, it was such an exciting opportunity that they sunk hundreds of millions of dollars into its development and production. And when they unveiled this world-changing innovation to the market, very few people bought it. Now, the company's records are private. We don't know exactly how bad the situation was, but compared to their public statements of how much they intended to sell, over 5 years, they sold about 10% of that. And so, you know, and that was a very large business startup company. Small businesses have this all the time. If you're starting something new, how do you know whether or not it's going to work? And fortunately, there are an enormous number of things that you can do to collect information as you go so you don't sink years of your life and lots of money developing something that nobody wants. And this idea is related to experimentation. and prototyping and iteration. Developing something very small, the smallest possible thing that you can create that will actually sell to a real live customer. It's called a minimum economically viable offer. You're developing the smallest thing that somebody actually will pull out their wallet and pay for, and then you improve that thing over time. And by investing just a little bit first in what you need to create to find out whether or not what you're developing will actually sell to someone, you can reduce the risks that you carry in developing something new. And this is not just a small company problem. As we talked about, it applies to the segue. But in my job at P&G, there was a great example of this. One of my very first projects when I worked at P&G, I was working on Mr. Clean and home cleaning products, which is an exciting category to work in. And there was a really great innovation that came out of the R&D lab about a product that, if you used it, would make your bathroom less dirty over time. So you could clean less often than you were cleaning right now, which sounds great, right? I mean, who wants to clean their bathroom more often than they are right now? No one. So it sounds really good, and it was very exciting, and the science says that it worked. And it's a really good thing that P&G did not decide to take this idea and do a full-blown commercialization, because what they did was they decided to test it. They had a group of about 100 people, and they actually gave this a prototype of this product to them and said, use it for a period of about 6 weeks, and we're going to ask you a lot of questions, and we'll see how you like it. Almost to the person, people came back and said, this doesn't work, this is a piece of crap, or I got a dud. Can you send me another one? Because this is not working. And there's a psychological tendency that every person has, which is called absence blindness. We are tuned to see things in the world around us. We are not tuned to see things that aren't there or aren't happening. And so when you use a cleaning product, you spray it on the wall and you use your sponge to wipe things off, you see the grime disappearing as you do that. It makes sense. When you are seeing something that is not happening, nothing registers, and therefore it doesn't work. And so we tested this product, and uniformly, horrible reviews. And so by testing the product first with a very small group of people, we decided to cancel that project. And it was a very good thing we did, because it would have lost money hand over fist. And so things that you can do to experiment, to test, to iterate, to develop something small and to build on it, those things reduce the risk that you're going to develop something that nobody's going to want. Now, does anybody ski or skateboard or snowboard or do tricks here? What was the first trick that you tried?
Rail park on my face.
Yeah, how did it go?
I fell on my face.
Fell on your face. Okay. Did you expect to fall on your face?
I was hoping to fall on my ass.
Okay, gotcha. Much better to fall on your ass than fall on your face. And that's the thing about trying something new. You have to be willing to fall on your face or fall on your ass, or you're not going to be willing to extend enough to try it. And so a lot of the creation and delivery parts of business are all about figuring out, how can I try something new that has a very real risk of failure? I mean, none of us can see what the future holds for us. We can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to work, and we can't know what's going to work. And so what can you do to actually create something in a way that has a very real risk of failure, but those failures won't kill you, and they won't end your company or your business? And the reality is, we are all going to make mistakes. When we knit a hat for the first time, it is going to look something like this. And that's okay. Because if you plan your business in such a way as to minimize the risk of a catastrophic failure, you can experiment very quickly to find something that works. And when you find something that works, you build on it. Does that make sense? Okay. Every business really works that way. Now, the second area, which isn't necessarily directly related directly to business, to the 5 parts, but is part and parcel of what business is really about, is people, right? Businesses are created by human beings like you and me. Our customers are human beings like you and me. Our employees, the people that we're managing, are all human beings. And so the more you understand about how people work, how they gather information, how they make decisions, how they interact with each other in groups, the more you understand about human psychology, the more you can work effectively with yourself, and the more effectively you can work with the people around you, either your employees or your customers. And there have been enormous advances in the realm of human psychology over the past 20 years. And things like cognitive neuroscience are telling us a lot more about how we really do gather information, how we make decisions, and how those decisions can often malfunction. There's an entire subfield of psychology called cognitive bias, which is basically figuring out how the human brain systematically does things wrong. And knowing those things in advance can be enormously beneficial. So think of something like absence blindness. That's a cognitive bias. Our brain malfunctions in treating things that aren't there as less important than things there are, when really the things that are absent may be more important than the things that are there. The more you know things like that in advance, the more you can plan for it, the more you can build that into how you deal with the people around you, and the better decisions you can ultimately make. Now, one of the things that's very useful to understand about how the brain works has to do with the field of productivity. So all of us, it's very rare now for anyone anywhere around the world to work solely with their hands anymore. In some way, shape, or form, we're working with our minds and we're working with our bodies. And so if you do any sort of creative work at all, you really are the tool that you are using to get things done. And the more you understand how your brain and your body actually work, the more you can structure your environment, structure your team, structure your projects to actually work with the way that you naturally work instead of work against it. So instead of chugging 8 gallons of coffee every morning in order to feel motivated, you can actually change the environment around you to make it easier for you to get the things done that you need to get done. Now, communication and psychology also has a lot to do with communication. How we interact with each other, how we form teams, how we work in groups, and how to establish teams that actually are effective instead of teams or committees in which nothing gets done. I'm sure, has anybody ever been in a meeting where the sole purpose of that meeting was to prepare for another meeting? Everybody? Me too. There's a reason for that, and it's an idea called communication overhead. So basically, every single person that you add to a team, you're theoretically adding to the capability of that team, right? More hands, more work. More brains, more work, right? After a certain point, adding an additional team member becomes a net drag on the performance of that team instead of a benefit. And the reason is, when you have a group well, if you have one person, there's no communication that needs to happen, right? Everything's happening up here. And so that person can be very efficient. They decide to do something, they do it, done. Add 2 people. What happens is, not only do they have to do the work, they have to spend some time and energy communicating with each other in order to make sure they're both working on the same thing, right? Add another person. The communication that those people have to do goes up dramatically, right? They're not just communicating with one person, they're communicating with 2. And they have to spend much more time and energy on making sure they're all on the same page. Now expand that team to 1,000, and let's assume all of those people have to be on the same page in order to get something done. As the number of people on the team goes up, the percentage of time and energy those people are spending in communication versus actually moving the project forward goes up towards 100%. And so understanding how people work in groups, understanding that there is a drag in performance when it comes to communication, has a massive influence on how you choose to structure your teams in the first place. There is a reason that elite medical teams, SWAT teams, all of the high-performing teams that you can think of have more than 3, but less than 12 participants. It's because that tends to be the sweet spot, depending on the function, where each additional team member is adding more in capacity than they're taking away in communication overhead. So knowing some of these very basic things about how people interact makes it much easier to actually create a team of people that can actually be effective at getting whatever it is they're supposed to be doing done. The last part is whenever you have a group of people, you have conflict. You have people with competing goals. You have people with competing priorities. And knowing how people choose their goals, how they decide to do what they want to do, what types of situations tend to provoke conflict, and how to actually go through a process of understanding what somebody really wants and restructuring the situation to make that conflict disappear is enormously important. And so understanding how people work, how they communicate, how they work in groups, how to notice and avoid and resolve conflict, the more you understand about those topics, the more effective you will be as a business person, no matter who you are or what you do. Now, the third major subject that is not directly a part of the 5 parts of every business, but is related to all steps in some way, shape, or form, is the study of systems. If you think about it, every business is just a system, right? The 5 parts of every business, the things you are doing in that order, it's a repeatable process. You're creating a process that produces a result, which is a happy customer and more money in your bank account. And you want to do that over and over and over and over again, as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and as effectively as possible. And so a lot of people, when it gets to the study of systems, some people's eyes tend to glaze over. Like, this is the boring, complicated part that I don't understand. And this is actually the part where technical folks have a massive advantage versus people in, let's say, more directly creative disciplines like art, because systems are a part of how you do your job. And if you look at your business as a system and you understand how all of the parts of that system, and you can deconstruct and see how everything is working together, you can take that knowledge to make improvements that benefit the entire system as a whole. And a good example are 2 related concepts called amplification and accumulation. So accumulation is when you make a change once to your system and the results add over time, right? So let's say you move to a new apartment and your rent decreases by $100 a month. That is accumulation. You save $100 every month that goes by, and those savings add up. Amplification is when you make a similar change to a scalable system, a system that can multiply. So there's a really great example of, you remember about, have you ever seen an old soda can? The ones that were made of steel that were really heavy, kind of cylindrical? Like if you throw an empty can at somebody, it would hurt. Cans don't look like that anymore, and there's a reason. The old cans were actually made out of stainless steel, and they were about 2 millimeters thick on all sides. Required a lot of material. And they were cylindrical because that's the only way that they could figure out how to produce it. But can design has changed, so now the can is necked at the top. It kind of goes in a little bit, and that makes it easier to drink from, which is a benefit for the end user. But it also, because of how the physics work, it makes the can able to withstand much more pressure using much less material. So whereas an old can, the size may be 2 millimeters thick, now it's about 90 micrometers thick. That's a huge savings in terms of raw material costs, right? And even if you're only saving fractions of a cent on a single can, think of how many beverage cans are produced worldwide every year. Billions, trillions. And the savings of making that one change in the can design are multiplied across all of the cans that are now produced and ever will be produced. And so if you're able to make a change to a scalable system, something that multiplies, that the effectiveness of that change is multiplied across the entire system. And the more you understand about the parts of your system that actually multiply, the more you can hone in on making some of these very small changes that have huge results. Now, the other thing about systems to understand is that shit happens. Things go wrong, things break. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And if you understand how the system works enough to understand what could potentially break, what could potentially go wrong, how things might turn out, not turn out as expected, you can plan for those in advance. There's a very powerful capability of our brain that's called scenario planning. We're able to use our imaginations, assume the future is going to look a certain way, and then say, what would happen if that really does become true? Using that capability, along with understanding how the system you're working in works, allows you to avoid some of these incidents that could threaten your business. And the more you can prepare in advance for those things that could go wrong, the better off you'll be. There's a very underrated concept when it comes to the business world, and the idea is called resilience, which is your ability to withstand things that go wrong. And a lot of the talk that's happening in terms of management and business now is all about optimization, right? How can we eke out the very last bit of performance? And how can we eke out the very last quarter cent in our earnings per share numbers this month? That is a very dangerous mentality when it comes to systems because things go wrong. So all of us pay car insurance, right? How many people, raise your hands, really hope to collect a claim on their car insurance within this month? Nobody, right? If you don't collect a claim, you are throwing hundreds of dollars away every month, right? You're spending money on something you're not using. That's not performance maximization, right? You could put you start a business with that money, you could invest it, and you could have more money left when you're done. But we don't do that because we understand that if something happens, if our car gets totaled, we want that insurance. It protects us against something bad happening. That insurance makes us resilient against something that's very important. And you can apply the same idea to your business or to your work. So anybody ever had have a hard drive crash? How did it feel? Yeah, horrible, horrible. One of the things when I was writing my book that I was slightly paranoid about was backing it up, because I spent a lot of time, and if my hard drive crashes, I would lose everything and have to do it all over again, and that sucks. And so planning for resilience is very important, because if you don't plan for it, you can't just go back and, let's say your hard drive crashes, you can't raise your hand at that point and say, I would like to install a backup system now. It doesn't work that way. You have to invest in the resilience before things happen. And when you do, when the bad thing happens, you're covered. And so planning to make your system resilient is extremely important, because you can't do it after the fact. And the more backup systems, the more fail-safes you have, the more resilient your business system is, and the better off you'll do in the long run. And so what I want to leave you with before we open it up for Q&A is business is really a creative exercise. It's an exploration exercise. You're taking what you learn about how the world actually works and what people actually want, and you're using that to create something that people find valuable. It really is a very creative, very exploratory thing to do. And if you're setting off on some type of journey, you would be foolish not to be as prepared as you can possibly be in advance, to learn the route, to learn the things that will help you. And if you do just a little bit of learning first, that creativity and that exploration is much easier. It goes much better. You get better results, and frankly, you have more fun. Because instead of freaking out about all the things that you don't know, you can spend more time and energy actually doing things that matter, that make a difference. And so I really encourage you, if you're interested in exploring the topic of business, there's really only a small set of things that you need to know. And it doesn't take much time and it doesn't take much energy to learn those things first. And once you learn them, you'll use them for the rest of your career and the rest of your life. So that's the end of my formal presentation. I hope you found it useful, and I'm happy to take any questions. It could be related to this. It could be related to education or credentialing in general. Happy to, yeah.
So this kind of goes back to the earlier part of it about the credential process.
Sure.
It seems incredibly efficient.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what you think technology is doing, because it's very bright with this stuff. Right?
Absolutely.
Right. All those materials are actually available. You can Google a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of businesses have been thinking around this, but kind of what do you think is preferred towards removing the cost associated with getting an MBA?
Yeah.
Law school degree. And we can actually close conversation with education overall, but But I guess, because of the MBA talk specifically, right?
Sure. Yeah, the big thing is, oh yeah, so it's how to disrupt the MBA or credentialing in general through technology. I think over the past several decades, in most people's minds, education and credentialing were considered the same thing, right? You go to school, and that's where you're both learning and you're getting the stamp of approval or getting your ticket punched in order to go on to something new. As the credentialing process becomes more and more expensive, and people have to give up more and more in order to have their ticket punched, for lack of a better term. What technology is able to do is separate those a little bit. And so the education and the learning, you're right, you can do it on your own. You can do it through books. You can do it by Googling. You can go to YouTube and watch all sorts of educational content. And that's very good and very valuable. I think the next big step is going to be when a lot of these organizations who rely on the credentialing process as a screen, as a way of separating out who I want to interview from who I don't want to bring in. When there is some very straightforward credentialing process that does not have to go to school, and that could be a test, that could be a project, that could be an apprenticeship or an internship. When the credentialing process is separated from the education process, that's when the big shift is going to occur. And I think it's happening right now, but we're not anywhere close to them being fully separate yet.
What about the institutions like, say, Harvard, Stanford, running these MBA programs that are charging you that fee?
Yep.
What is have you engaged in, you create a personal MBA, right?
Sure.
You basically compete with those institutions.
That sort of
thing. In some sense, right?
Yeah.
In the education. What is have you interacted with that community at all? Kind of engaged in discussions at all around this process, these problems?
Yeah. Absolutely. I've talked to a lot of business school professors and a lot of business school deans. And reviews are mixed, as you might anticipate. There are a lot of business professors and actually graduates from business school programs, including top programs, who don't see the personal MBA as a competitor at all. Because even if you get an MBA, you really do need the continuing education and to learn all of the stuff that you might or might not have picked up in business school anyway. So they're really complementary in the learning sense. I'm just, we're trying to learn things that are useful. It doesn't matter if you've gone to business school or not. Business school deans don't like me, which is okay, because I'm saying that their product is way too expensive for the value it provides. And their response is, well, people are still paying to attend our program. And so there must be some value in it in order for them to do that. And that's okay too. I think business schools over the next couple of years are going to be under an enormous amount of pressure because of tuition. And they're experimenting with different approaches. We really haven't seen anything. They have no incentive to take their costs down. And frankly, for most universities, MBA programs are the cash cow. That's where a lot of the tuition dollars flow into the university. And that program then subsidizes all of the programs, PhDs, research, humanities, things like that. And so business schools, frankly, don't really have an incentive to change this stuff.
So it's more about the institutions that rely on the
Yes,
MBAs.
exactly. So I actually think that a lot of the institutions in the future that are going to do really, really well are going to be the ones that identify the promising candidates early, high school or pre-high school, and have some form. I mean, it's almost the return of an apprenticeship model. You find the promising people early, you teach them exactly what they need to know as quickly as possible, and you give them real-world experience with real problems. I think that's
Create its own universe.
exactly.
Just going back to what you're saying here, what do you think the actual value of the education is, be it either attending business school or reading the books, compared to the internship or the co-programs you're talking about? And how much is education just the rest? Like, how much is education just a signal to an employer to say, I'm the kind of person who can get through this educational experience, therefore I have a great capacity, so hire me, at which point you probably end up doing something like an apprenticeship anyway.
Right.
How much of what you learn is what you're learn to?
Yeah, so to repeat the question, just what's the difference between the education and the credentialing part of going to a university versus doing yourself versus doing an apprenticeship? That's why I really try to be very careful about separating the credentialing part from the education part. They really are two very different things. So, if we think of education as learning things that you will find useful in the doing of whatever it is that you do, you can learn a lot in business school. You can learn a lot in an apprenticeship, and you can learn a lot studying this stuff on your own. The things that will be useful, it's all the same stuff. It's just delivery mechanisms. The central concepts that provide most of the value, those are universal. However you learn it is fantastic. I think the credentialing part is very different. And I think we're going to see over the next couple of years a lot of variability in how that happens and a lot of experimentation, frankly, in different ways of doing it. Because for the way that it's being done right now, it's incredibly expensive and very inefficient. So, we'll see. Does it help? Okay.
So there are companies that focus on the credentials.
Yep.
For example, Kaufman.
Sure.
You already have a brand that is working in this space. Are there any plans for you to try and come up with a credential in conjunction with those types of companies?
That's actually a very good question, and is something that I have thought about for a very long time. I think if I go that route, what I'm really focused on is I would like to provide some type of credential that actually helps the people in an educational way as they are actively pursuing it. And so one of the things, particularly when it comes to business, when you talk to people in high school or just out of high school and are going to college, there's still this tremendous perceived amount of risk of actually going out and starting a business right out of school. It's like the default, that what a young successful or what a young ambitious person wants to do if they want to become successful is automatically go to college, straight out. And I think there's probably an opportunity to develop something that a credential that would give them real world experience and alleviate some of that perceived risk of, what if I start this business and it doesn't work out and I want to go work for an employer elsewhere. So yeah, it's an open question, but I do think there's an opportunity there.
But that's at the high school level. Are you looking at something at more at the postgraduate level?
Yes, I think the problem starts post high school, but yeah, this is a problem that extends, well into your 40s in most cases. And so yeah, the same approach would do the same thing.
I have two questions. One is, you talked about the personal people functioning and how the world libraries are making about the world.
Sure.
Can you tell us some of the best work secret?
Oh yes, there is. Yeah, if you go to personalmba.com and you go to the reading list section, I have a list. It's called the Personal MBA recommended reading list. It's a list of 99 books that I have found most valuable in my education. That covers everything that we've talked about, business, people, and systems. Yep. Not necessarily. It would depend on how it was done. I think the credentialing body, or a credential in terms of employers actually using it, they use it as a risk mitigation strategy, right? It's a way of filtering out all of the people who are coming to their door, so they don't have to interview everybody. They can just interview some subsegment. So most employers look at credentials as a way of assuring at least a minimum amount of competence and credibility before they ever get to the interview process. And traditionally, accreditation was a way that these employers could understand that a college was meeting certain credentials and they weren't just handing out degrees in lieu of payment, or for a payment. And so I think particularly with technology and the internet, the oversight part of accreditation has become much less important because let's say hypothetical credentialed student has a massive portfolio on their website in terms of talking about the projects that they've worked on, showing their work, essentially. If there was a centralized way to do that an employer could take a look and say, yes, this person has met some certain amount of requirements, they're a good person to interview, that's the real purpose of the credential. And so I'm just trying to disaggregate them as much as possible.
One thing that's been very interesting in the past 2 years is the fact that MBA doesn't prepare people for like right?
Right.
Schools tend to teach things that are
Yeah, I think one thing from a curriculum standpoint that MBA programs don't do incredibly well is focus on the core principles first. So if you go to business school, either at the graduate or the undergraduate level, it's kind of assumed that you already know what a business is, how it works, how it functions, all this stuff, and we're going to jump right into the quantitative analysis part so we can do a CAPM calculation. And I think a lot of the things, as you pointed out with the credit crisis, I think that's a symptom of not understanding enough about some of the core ideas that we've talked about. So when you understand things like resilience, of second order effects, of understanding how this model interacts and how it could possibly break. If you understand all that stuff first, then you can learn something like the capital asset pricing model and use it for what it's intended to do with all of the limitations that it has. And so what I would really like to see, from a business school standpoint, I think every business program that's out there would do much better to actually take a step back, focus on learning the core stuff first, and then layer on the finance and layer on the quantitative analysis on top of that. Because people will get a much better education that way. It's all the same stuff. Does that help?
Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of the framework that you developed, your last process, your value delivery, sales, marketing, et cetera.
Yep.
Was that framework, did you come across it in your reading, or is that kind of the pattern recognition you found after just instilling so many of these different books? And at the end of the day, is that really is that the pattern from a bunch of these different books, and kind of that's what they focus on because these are just core fundamental principles? Or is it ones that you prioritize as better than others?
Yeah, so I really wish that the 5 parts of every business, I really wish I would have read that in a book because it would mean that it had been out there for a long time. It's not. It's something that I had to develop from reading all of this stuff and trying to synthesize it for my own understanding. And so a lot of these ideas exist in little pieces, parts out there in the world. And sometimes you'll read a book that is, the whole book is focused on some very little sliver. And so, over the past 6 years, reading thousands of books, what I've been really trying to do is to synthesize that and put them all together in the smallest, clearest, most complete form that I possibly could. So yeah, pretty much everything that I talk about is not directly from other folks. It's all bringing it together in a way that you can understand it as a whole. So thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation and showing up. I appreciate it.